Welcome everyone. I'm excited to present the webinar Introduction to Building Energy Benchmarking that is hosted by the DC Sustainable Energy Utility and the Department of Energy and Environment of the District of Columbia. Over the next hour, I will provide an introduction to building energy benchmarking. So the webinar will provide an overview of the idea and the concept of energy benchmarking, the value that we get out of it, and where benchmarking is required, including the requirements that we have in the District of Columbia. You see here a brief agenda. I do a very quick introduction. I talk a little bit about what benchmarking is. I show you benchmarking programs and policies across the nation. We will talk about energy use intensity as the main metric for energy benchmarking, and then also about the Energy Star Portfolio Manager as the main tool for building energy benchmarking. And then we close out the presentation with a little bit of information on benchmarking disclosure and the larger purpose on everything. So I spare you going through everything that you can read here, and by the way, the presentation will be provided. It is also recorded, so you can go back to those slides later. I give you a brief 45-second version of my introduction. I was born, raised, and trained as a mechanical engineer in Germany, lived a long time in Munich in Germany. In 2006, I moved to the United States, to Washington, D.C., and started my own engineering consulting firm. In that firm, we provide energy and sustainability services for the real estate industry, concept, simulation, analysis, verification, and certification of energy efficiency and sustainability for buildings. And our goal is really to make high-performance buildings the norm of our industry. Baumann Consulting, my firm, has a transatlantic footprint with a team of about 25 employees in 3 offices in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Frankfurt, Germany. So what is benchmarking? When I present on benchmarking, I typically want to go back and really talk a little bit about the context. So that the term benchmark or benchmark originates from the from surveying, and on the top right you see actually a benchmark. So that was a mark that was typically placed into stone or masonry structures and provided a firm reference point for future measurements. So benchmarking is the practice of comparing processes, could be business processes or devices or anything that where you are interested in measuring and comparing the performance, and it uses performance metrics, and it typically compares that to industry standards, to best practice, or to other norm and standard values. So benchmark is a reference point. When we talk about energy performance benchmarking, in the world of business, benchmark is the practice of comparing the measured performance of a device, process, facility, or organization to itself, its peers, or established norms with the goal of informing and motivating performance improvements. So that is really important to understand. Why do we do energy benchmarking or benchmarking in general? We want to understand how we compare with others, and so that we have an idea how and where we can improve our performance. When applied to building energy use, benchmarking helps to measure energy performance of a single building or entire portfolio over time and compares it relative to other similar buildings. It can also be compared to model performance or reference building that is built to a specific standard, in which case we then talk about compliance benchmarking, such as for energy codes. Building energy performance benchmarking is the foundation of any energy management strategy, simply because you can't measure, you can't manage what you don't measure. When we look across the nation, United States here, and by the way, on most of the slides that I'm presenting on the bottom right, you will see where the information is sourced from. And in the presentation that you will have access to later, there will be a link to that site, so you're able to access that information by yourself. So EPA Energy Star website has this, it's an interactive map that shows all voluntary and mandatory benchmarking programs and policies in the United States. Building energy benchmarking has really become quite popular over the past few years, as we can see here. In Europe, it has been an important cornerstone of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the EPBD, for more than 2 decades now. And it has been boosting energy performance of buildings in the European Union and enabling consumers and businesses to make more informed choices when it comes to energy efficiency decisions and to save energy and money to achieve a highly energy efficient and decarbonized building stock. And the goal is to have that by 2050. Following the introduction of energy performance rules, including the building energy benchmarking in the national building codes, buildings today in Europe consume only half as much as typical buildings from back in the 1980s. So there is a proven impact that energy benchmarking can have. When we look at that, I said this is an interactive map here. I only have screenshots, but when you zoom in, you can actually go into the details, and this is the Washington, D.C. metro area. So you see, of course, Washington, D.C., as we know, has energy benchmarking programs and policies, but also the city of Rockville, Arlington County, Fairfax County, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County. And that website, I can highly recommend to everyone to really go there and visit that website, because it also provides you, when you click on these marks here, the information what energy benchmarking programs and policies are in place and what are the requirements, what type of program it is, and whether they're still active or expired, and also when they were implemented. When we look at the impact of those policies, so this is a chart that shows the number of properties that are covered by those various energy benchmarking policies and programs that I showed you on the previous page. So this is a chart that I took from the building rating website. It was created by the Institute for Market Transformation. I don't really know if there's a particular order of these cities and states that are mentioned here, and counties, but you see that there's quite a few jurisdictions throughout the United States that have those programs in place, and including Washington, D.C., that covers about 2,000 properties. And all these policies and programs combined impact more than 91,000 properties and totaling approximately 11 billion square foot of floor space. So this is quite an important impact, and these numbers actually go up every year. Last year, when I checked this number, it was at 85,000 properties, so now it's 91,000 and still counting as we add policies and programs in other jurisdictions, and also as these programs are extended to smaller buildings, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So to summarize, really the extent to benchmarking. Benchmarking is the process of evaluating or checking performance by comparison with a standard. And energy benchmarking in particular means tracking a building's energy and water use and using a standard metric to compare the building's performance against past performance and to its peers nationwide. And as you mentioned earlier, the comparisons really have shown to drive energy efficiency upgrades, increase occupancy rates and property values. In Washington, D.C., we have the Clean and Affordable Energy Act from 2008, and that was when energy benchmarking was required for the first time for buildings of 50,000 square feet gross floor area, and also for district government-owned buildings of over 10,000 square feet. Benchmarking is done using the EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and we'll look into that a little bit more throughout this presentation. So for the building energy benchmarking requirements in DC, as I mentioned, who is required to do building energy benchmarking? It's all private buildings currently over 50,000 square feet gross floor area, and district government-owned buildings over 10,000 square feet. Within the District of Columbia, it includes multifamily residences, and these buildings must measure and disclose their energy and water consumption to the Department of Energy and Environment, DOE, through their website. So it does not only include the energy, but also the water consumption. The focus on this presentation is mostly on energy benchmarking, but you can also apply the similar principles and procedures to the water consumption. So what is being benchmarked in Washington, D.C.? It is the building's energy and water use. The reporting deadline is April 1st of each year. And the benchmarking is submitted through the EPA Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool or another third-party tool that can report through Portfolio Manager. But Portfolio Manager is really the basis for the benchmarking. So you might have heard about the benchmarking data verification. So what is this? The district will require that properties obtain a third-party verification every 3 years for their benchmarking data that they submit to DOE. And for the current reporting year, DOE and DCSEU are offering no-cost verification to certain buildings, and this is currently ongoing. And with the upcoming building energy performance standards, BEPS, as you might have heard, also, it is very crucial to have accurate and verified benchmarking data, since this is really setting the baseline for the performance standard that properties have to be compared to and will be required to meet starting in 2021. So what's the benefit for property owners to do energy benchmarking? In the first place, you are avoiding fines if you don't do it, because it's a mandatory requirement in the district. But more importantly, benchmarking results really allow you to make very informed and targeted decisions to where you want to put your money to improve the energy efficiency and increase efficiency, and also to monitor how these efficiency measures will turn out and how much money and energy you save after the implementation of these measures, and how your efficiency and energy consumption will develop over the years. One important aspect of benchmarking and energy benchmarking is that this is a continuous process that happens every year.
Oliver,
Yes.
We have a question, a related question from Brian in the audience. The question is, does the 50,000 square feet rule apply for an entire property or a single building?
I'm not 100% sure what the difference between property and single building is in that context. Not sure if there can be more clarification.
So, Kaylin, this is Scott. Just to weigh in real quickly, I think it would depend on the type of building, and if it were one that had a category where Energy Star would consider a building, a group of buildings, something that would be benchmarked together. So, for example, a hospital complex or certain multifamily complexes. But that would be something you could clarify by going to DCSEU, DOEE's website, and they have an info help center that you could ask that question to.
Okay, thank you, Scott, for the clarification. And my assumption would really be that this 50,000 square foot limit is per building, and not per, like, if you combine several buildings into a campus and consider that a property. But as Scott said, there is clearly more clarification out there. Also on the benchmarking data verification, there will be another webinar on September 29 this year, where Scott Emery will present more insight and context on how this benchmarking data verification will happen. So we said that energy benchmarking needs a performance metric. And the performance metric used for building energy benchmarking is the energy use intensity, or EUI. It is expressed as energy per square foot and calculated by dividing the total energy consumed by the building over 1 year by the total gross floor area of the building. So it only really requires two inputs. It's the energy use and the floor area. There are different definitions of energy use, and we'll get to that. There's also different definitions of floor area in the real estate industry, and we'll dive into both these energy and floor area a little bit more. So I'm pretty sure you all heard about site energy and source energy. And site energy is what goes into your building and is typically measured by your utility meter. Source energy, in addition, accounts for the effort and also the energy needed for excavation, generation, or transformation, and also the transport and distribution of the energy to the consumer, which is your building. So source energy includes this entire chain and is typically a higher value as the site energy. Source energy is much more important than site energy if the concern is environmental performance and environmental impact, and the EPA has determined that source energy is the most equitable unit of evaluation and is therefore used for Energy Star. And source energy is also used for the benchmarking requirements in DC. So you have to be really careful, understanding that there is a difference. This is example what the difference might be. So there's a site versus source energy use intensity. When you look at electricity and you assume source energy of 100, and you account for all the energy losses through the extraction and processing of the raw material for the generation or transformation of one form of energy into another form of energy, and then the distribution Of those 100 energy units, only 32 are delivered to the customer. When you look at the natural gas, similar picture, you have source energy of 100, you still have extraction, processing, there's no generation, but there is distribution, and of those 100 energy units, you have 92 delivered to the customer. And well, this picture, as you can see, is taken from the Gas Technology Institute. So there are certain ways to manipulate those site to source energy numbers. One is certainly you can really, on the electricity side, you can put renewable energy in here at any point of that chain. So you can, on a utility scale, produce renewable energy. So you don't have the extraction and processing and also the generation fall apart. So you still have the distribution, or you can generate renewable energy on site, and that is then delivered directly to your building without any distribution or minor distribution losses. You don't have that opportunity on a natural gas site, but you of course also have the opportunity to combine those two energy streams and use the technology of cogeneration, combined heat and power, for example, to improve the source energy use intensity for your buildings. Another quick clarification. So in the energy use intensity, you include really everything, all energy that is consumed in your buildings for space heating, for space cooling, pumps and fans, lighting, hot water, but also any other loads. And the sum of that is your energy consumption, and you account for on-site energy production, renewable energy, and that divided by the floor area is your site energy use intensity. On the other side, when you include the utility energy generation and transmission losses, that is then your source energy use intensity. And both numbers are used in the industry and really have their purpose and are important. You have to understand when you look at numbers what it is, because they can differ by quite a bit. When it is electric energy, the conversion factor between source energy and site energy can be anywhere between 2 and 3. For gas, as we saw earlier, is a little bit lower, but there is a difference. So always pay attention to which energy numbers you use. When we a little bit later in this presentation, we talk about the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. You enter your site energy use. So that is the information that you obtain from your utility meters. And Energy Star, the Portfolio Manager, will calculate the source energy use intensity based on national average conversion factors. So you don't have to worry about that, and it's actually more convenient because that information is readily available to enter the site energy use. It's also important to understand the difference between site energy and source energy. This is an example again from the EPA Energy Star website. The link is provided here. There is much more information on that website that really gives you additional information beyond this introduction seminar here. So in this example, the building building B, based on site energy, appears to be more efficient, but then when you look at the source energy, which is almost identical, that is the more equitable comparison when you compare two buildings based on the energy benchmark. So for the energy benchmarking, we're still talking about the energy consumption, energy use side of the equation. For the EUI, we need to put energy data in. And this is, again, an interactive map from the EPA Energy Star website that shows across the entire country utility that provide access to their metering data through smart meters and web application. So as energy benchmarking becomes standard practice in the commercial building industry, owners and managers of buildings are seeking to simplify the process of obtaining utility data. And the good news is what we see here is that more and more utilities are really stepping up to help by making aggregate whole building data regularly available and by enabling customers to have their data sent automatically into their portfolio manager account via software tools and web services. So the portfolio manager really allows you to enter data in 3 ways. You can either manually enter your energy use data, you can upload spreadsheets, or you can link your utility data directly to your portfolio manager buildings. So this interactive map here shows the service territories of the utilities that provide customers with energy benchmarking data, and also this map is updated on a regular basis. So as additional utilities develop those services, they will be added to that map. And again, as previously with the with the benchmarking programs and policies, you can zoom into that map. And also the good news for the Washington DC and Washington DC metro area, both PEPCO as the electric utility and Washington Gas as the gas utility provide those services. So you can, in Portfolio Manager, link your property through your gas meter, through your utility meter information directly to the utilities, and they will share that information automatically with Portfolio Manager. So let's talk a little bit about building areas. BOMA has developed definitions of different building areas, and if you're in the commercial building industry, you're probably aware that there's different space classifications. When you're a landlord, you probably talk more about rentable space and usable space. If you're an energy consultant or energy professional, you're probably very familiar with the gross floor area. There are other areas, and I want to clarify a little bit what the right area is when you do benchmarking. So here, this is a list of different building area characterizations and terms. We have the gross building area, we have the gross floor area, usable area, net assignable area, also zoning floor area. That is important when it comes to the floor area ratio, and then also site area. And these pictures here on the right, I hope they're big enough. These are also in this website, the Arch Toolbox. They have very helpful information for our industry, so that color codes a little bit better what is meant by gross building area. So this is a simple office building with 3 floors. We have a lobby here, a building core, tenant space. We have a space in the lobby that is 2-story high. So this is an open space here, and it's color coded what area you would consider being the gross building area, gross floor area, that's the purple one, the usable area, and the rentable area, which is then the blue color here on the bottom row. So you see there's a difference, but the gross floor area general rule is that it includes all area that is included with surrounding exterior walls, and it's typically measured from the exterior dimensions of your building enclosure. And here another chart how those different area categorizations play together. So you have on the smallest increment level the floor, the usable floor area, the functional area, and circulation area. All these together make up the floor area, and you have then structure area. That's the space that your columns and walls take up, and those two together is your gross floor area. And that is the area that you want to use for your energy benchmarking. And when we look at energy benchmarks, there's quite often discrepancy of the correct area that is being used, because if you're a tenant, you typically know your rentable area or the area that you're renting, but that does not include the structure area, or also typically not circulation or functional areas. If you're a landlord, a building owner, you're also probably more familiar with the floor, the net floor area, because this might be the area that you use for facility management contracts, for cleaning contracts. But again, the gross floor area is what we want to use for the building energy benchmarking. So let's talk about the Energy Star portfolio manager. Energy Star has great technical references out there. Now we'll have a list of more training material just in a few slides from here. But the objectives that EPA has identified is for a successful energy performance metric is really to evaluate energy performance for the entire building, for the whole building, and to use actual metered energy use rather than calculated. We want to equitably account for different energy sources, so that is why we use the source energy, and it's then also normalized for building activity. So you can imagine that a hospital has a different energy use intensity than a school, than an office building, or a parking garage. So we do have different building categories when we do building energy benchmarking, and also within a category, it is normalized for the activity, so that if you compare one office building that has a higher density, more computers, more internal loads, that you can still compare the energy use intensity, the EUI, with another office building with lesser internal loads. Very important right now. Just imagine in the current situation where many office buildings are not fully utilized because people work from home. That is very important that you keep that in mind. And in Energy Star, in the portfolio manager, you do have an option to adjust your building use for a reduced use time and a reduced occupancy in your schedules. What the Energy Star score does is it evaluates actual metered energy use. It normalizes for business activities, hours, number of workers, computers, climate. It compares buildings to the national population, and it indicates the level of energy performance. What this score does not is, it is not a sum of energy use of different systems and pieces of equipment, so it does not account for or it doesn't give the granularity of energy use for heating versus ventilation versus lighting. It does not credit those specific technologies. It also does not credit, for example, a certain condensing boiler versus a steam boiler. It does not compare buildings with others in portfolio manager. It's really a comparison on the national average, and it also does not explain why a building performs well or poorly. This would then be a subsequent activity where, based on your energy benchmark score, you can make an informed decision whether you would need to investigate in the energy efficiency of a particular building more, and, for example, do a energy audit, level 1, level 2 energy audit, or a retro commissioning or retrofit analysis for that building. The process then of computing this score in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So step 1 is that the user enters building data into the Portfolio Manager. That is 12 months of complete energy use information for all energy types. So it's really important that you account for all energy. Typically, that is your electricity meter. You have to be careful if your building has more than one utility meter. You don't need to account for sub-meters as long as they are included in the main utility meter. But then also, if you have an oil tank or a propane tank, that energy also needs to be included in the energy use information. You specify your building information, you specify the size, the location, and also the details describing the building use and the activity. So you specify whether that's an office building or hospital or school or dormitory, and you enter the hours of use. You enter the, again, number of workers if it's an office building. You enter the number of computers. So you do have to understand the characteristics of your building, and you do have to know the inventory as it relates to energy consuming equipment. Portfolio Manager then computes the actual source EUI. So the energy consumption for each fuel is converted from site energy to source energy, and Portfolio Manager uses national average for actually not national average, but regional conversion factors. And source energy values are then summed up across all fuel types, and the source energy is divided by the gross flow area that you entered earlier, and that is your actual source EUI that is calculated. Portfolio Manager also computes a predicted source EUI. So Portfolio Manager uses statistical information from a survey, CBEX survey, but it then accounts for the normalization. So if your building has more computers or shorter office hours, or if wherever it deviates from the standard, from your typical office, it is calculated through a conversion factor. Then portfolio manager computes the energy efficiency ratio, and that is comparing the actual source EY divided by the predicted source EY, and then that gives your energy score. And then portfolio manager actually uses the efficiency ratio to assign a score from a lookup table. So the energy star score is from 1 to 100 scale, 50 being exactly the median energy efficiency score of all buildings in that building category. So if the higher your score is, the more efficient is your building. And for all buildings that have a score of 75 or higher, they can qualify for a Energy Star certification. I'm just seeing that I'm getting messages on Teams with questions. Kaelin or Rick, if there are any questions, I would appreciate if you would let me know.
There's one question. It's a question from it's an anonymous user, and they asked if can a third-party benchmarking service become certified to verify benchmarking as well for other properties?
I do not know the answer to that question. So
Oliver, I can weigh in real quick. That'll help.
Okay.
Sure. So 2 points. One is under the Energy Star program, verification requires a professional engineering license. So you can do verification for someone who wants to get Energy Star certified if you're a professional engineer, but you don't have to be in the jurisdiction. Just a PE license anywhere will qualify you for that. Within the district's program, the rules for that have not been set. The intent is, yes, there will be a process to qualify third-party verifiers. Those rules are going to be published. The plan is in September, so sometime later this month, and they'll be out for review, and then the rules will be finalized at the end of the year. So what's going to be required for that has yet to be published, but I expect it'll be similar to what is required in Energy Star, maybe with some expanded categories. But those rules aren't set yet, but there will be ways for people to become verified verifiers under the program once those rules are issued.
Thank you, Scott and Oliver. I have one more question that just popped in from another anonymous attendee. As an owner, we can put various efficient systems in place to reduce energy consumption, but we cannot control what residents do or use inside their units, especially if they pay their own utility bills. How do we prevent from being unfairly penalized? Sorry about that.
To my knowledge, these energy users will not go into your base building energy score if they are measured separately and paid for directly by the residents. And Scott, I would hope that you maybe can chime in here and maybe confirm that or tell me that I'm mistaken here.
Well, there are certain situations where you can accept, you can carve out that use based on how it's set up. If it is separately metered and meets certain criteria, then you can exclude it. And those are fairly explicit definitely like if you have, say, a building with a large restaurant in it, that large restaurant can be set out as a separate building, and we've actually seen that in benchmarking we've done where that really changes the base building score. I think in terms of that behavior of the occupants, it's really one of the big sort of, I think, questions out there in the industry that we're all working on, and how do we help motivate that? I think a lot of the way our leases and things what are set up are going to have to start considering how the impact of energy use is, and so I think it's a matter of just trying to help motivate best behavior and educate users. I mean, there's a lot of very simple things users can do to lower energy use if they're just made aware of what they're doing. But it's certainly one of those challenges for the industry, and I think all of us have to keep working on that.
Thank you. Were there any other questions?
Yeah, we have about 3 other questions that came in. If you wanted to, we can run through them now. If you wanted to hold them until the end, just let me know. But
I would almost say I have a few more slides. Let's hold them to the end. I think the presentation will wrap up in about 5 minutes, and then we still have 10 minutes for additional questions.
Okay, great. Well,
Okay.
I'll hold these to the end.
Okay, thank you. So to get started with your building energy benchmarking in the portfolio manager, you will need the property information, the primary function, the name, address, postal code, because that's how portfolio manager uses then the conversion factors for the source energy calculation, and also for the weather normalization. You enter the year build, again, the gross floor area, and that's very important that you have the right area here. You then provide additional details, for example, the operating hours and number of computers, number of workers. And this is, of course, not a precise science. So this is where you really have to use your best guess and best information. But this is also information that will be verified. Then, as Scott said earlier, if you go for a Energy Star certification, it will be verified by a licensed professional, for example, a PE, and also then you need at least 12 months of consumption data for resources you want to track. And Portfolio Manager allows you to track energy use. It also allows you to track water use, and it also allows you to track waste. And you can enter materials, recycled, disposed, donated, etc. On the right, you see a screenshot of the Portfolio Manager main page. So there is an area where you either sign up or log into your Portfolio Manager account. There is a Portfolio Manager data collection worksheet that helps you to organize the information and the data that you need to provide. And there's also here framed here a lot of more information and help that you can get. So the Portfolio Manager is really an extremely powerful tool. It is very well documented, and I would say from my experience pretty straightforward, but you do have areas for the property use where you have to make decisions and decide what information you put in. There is, as I mentioned before, a lot more training material out there for Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and again, the website is linked here directly. So there are live online trainings, there are recorded trainings, there are different slide presentations online, and then there are very helpful demonstration videos to all the different steps that you need as you go through an Energy Star Portfolio Manager setup and data entering and also the implication for a Energy Star certification if you comply. I want to point out a couple things here specifically. You can hear also there are demonstration videos how to share properties in Portfolio Manager and how to request data from Portfolio Manager users. This is something that's relevant right now as we do the data verification, because DCSEU, DOEE will ask you to share your Portfolio Manager account, the data in that account with them for that independent verification. Then when we look at the energy benchmarking data, so each year the District of Columbia publishes detailed energy and water performance benchmarking data from the buildings that are covered in the benchmarking program. And this data is then disclosed beginning with the second year of data for building. So what we see here is from a recent report, the 2018 median source EUI for properties in the District of Columbia. So you see all the different building types, space types, from university, library, different office types, medical office, and other education facilities. And there's clearly one outlier, that's like a water treatment plant. When we take that out and adjust the scale a little bit, so you see a typical building, like between a school and office building, typical commercial buildings has a EUI between, I would say, 150 and 250, maybe 300 if you have a more intense usage, like a museum or hospital. But this gives you a good idea where your building should be and how it compares to the peers in the district, because this is really important then when we talk about BEPS and the performance standards in the district, because it doesn't compare anymore to national standard as the Energy Star Portfolio Manager does, but now we really compare to the peers in Washington, D.C. Also, then the Energy Star score here. You see that only some of the building categories actually have a Energy Star score, because not all usage types qualify for an Energy Star score, but those who do, we see that, so as I mentioned earlier, 50 would be the national average. Everything with an Energy Star score above 50 means it's better than the national average. And since we see that office buildings here, for example, are between 60 and 70, so that means that those buildings in Washington, D.C. are better, more energy efficient than the national average. We do have a few building categories that are below 50 Energy Star score of 50, but that might also be just a very small sample of buildings. So keep in mind, Washington, D.C. currently covers about 2,000 properties in their benchmarking audience. Another very powerful tool that I really like, it's interactive, it's a map, it contains a ton of data, is this map here. And I just realized I missed to put the link in here. I will make sure that the link to that website is included in the final presentation before it's distributed. But here, every dot here is a property in Washington, D.C. that is covered in the benchmarking ordinance, and you can filter here for property information, energy use, water use, but then also energy performance metrics. That's your Energy Star score. So the scale from red to blue tells you your Energy Star score. So you see there are quite a few blue buildings with or blue properties with high Energy Star scores, but there are also scattered properties and buildings that have a fairly low Energy Star score. You can zoom in, you can change the metric, you can look at the site energy use intensity, you can look at the source energy use intensity, you can look at the greenhouse gas emissions that are also calculated based on the source energy use. You can compare buildings, you see on the bottom different metrics. So this is really, again, a very powerful tool, and it provides high-level information, but also very granular information down to the individual property. So that is information that is disclosed. I covered the building name, the building address, but this is public information, so you could look up and see if you find your building here, and it tells you if the property is in compliance, what type it is, the size, and all the information, including the Energy Star score, the energy use intensity, and all this additional information. So what's next from here? DC DOE issues scorecards that really offers transparency for the energy efficiency of a property, and this is considered a starting point for subsequent energy efficiency investigations. For example, an ASHRAE level 1, 2, or 3 energy audit, as I mentioned earlier, that lead to decision and investment grade energy conservation measures with the goal to have an energy master plan for your property and entire portfolio. As we heard before, you can't manage what you don't measure, and you do need that transparency in order to take action. And that concludes the presentation. I hope it was a good overview, a good introduction to building energy benchmarking. There's obviously much more information out there. There's much more to talk about building energy benchmarking. But here, also a reminder, the webinar for the verifying energy benchmarking data that will take place on September 29 at the same time as this webinar today. So we have a few more minutes left for questions.
All right, Oliver, I have one question from an anonymous attendee. Is there an RFI for data verifiers?
Again, a question that I cannot answer. I don't believe there's currently an RFI or RFP out for data verifiers. Currently, there is a kind of a pilot program where DOE and DCSEU are verifying properties, benchmarking data. Not sure if someone from DCSEU actually has more information on that.
No, then if there's no RFPs, we don't have any RFPs or RFIs available at this time with DTS.
Okay.
But the next question is from an anonymous attendee. How are solar systems or non-traditional heating and cooling sources such as VRF accounted for? Oh, I'm sorry, I was hearing a little interruption.
Yeah, hold on. This is a noise in my house that should go away in just a moment.
Oh, no worries.
I apologize for that. Someone's trying to open the water on the outside.
I'll repeat the question.
So solar systems and any type of renewable energy is taking into account that is really a negative energy consumption. So on the site energy level, you enter the renewable energy that is produced on site, and that is subtracted from the site energy and then also accounted for when the source energy EOI is calculated. The other point, I think there was a question about the specific technology or equipment, if I remember the question correctly.
Yes, I'll repeat it again. How are solar systems and non-traditional heating and cooling sources such as VRF accounted for? I do not see systems for entry within Energy Star. That was the full question.
Yeah, VRF or any specific technology is not accounted for at all, because the portfolio manager, the energy benchmark, does really not account for how the energy is used in the building. It accounts for how much energy goes into the building. That is the site energy. Again, any renewable energy that is produced on site is accounted for, and then it calculates the source energy. But it does not give you any information about how or where the energy is used in the building or by what system.
All right, and I'm going to the next question. Also, in the example of the owner pays for the water and the building is on 1 meter, a very old building, even when with educating the residents, how is it possible to control the use of the tenants as we have no idea who is creating the high usage? Metering each unit, 200 plus units, in historical building is very costly. Is this part of your energy initiative to provide owners with funds to help ease the financial pain of meeting these new requirements?
So I think that this question has several answers. So it is a challenge, and right now, as Scott mentioned earlier, that there's really no real solution to address that problem, that you have tenants, that you have building occupants that use water, that use energy. Other than I would say two things. One is submetering, which would certainly help with that problem, but as pointed out, this is expensive and often in existing buildings simply not possible. The other solution is to make that transparent, and so that the tenants, the occupants of the building are aware of that. And I think that's where benchmarking, energy or water benchmarking, can really help to raise awareness and hopefully change behavior. Not sure if it's a possibility to provide monetary incentives. If you don't know really how it's how the distribution of the energy or the water use is throughout those 100 plus residential units, it's probably difficult. The other part of that question, are there any incentives for example, submeter installations? I would refer that question again to DCSEU.
All right, final two questions. I understand we might be able to back out the tenant utility portion and just report the building portion that we can actually control. But if there is 1 meter for the entire 300 unit building, I cannot see that happening. And then they followed up and they said with no sub-meters. No
and that is correct. That is correct.
Okay. And there was a follow-up question for the question with solar systems and traditional heating and cooling sources. Even if under a power purchase agreement and not truly free electricity, That was the question.
I assume that goes back to the renewable energy. So
Yes.
the renewable energy is only accounted for if it's produced on site. If you have a power purchase agreement that is still the same site energy use, and that is actually a good question. How, if you have a power purchase agreement for green power, for example, how does that go into your source energy? I had to look that up and get back with that question. Unless Scott, you have information on that.
I would have to back up and verify. My understanding is that if you have, say, a power purchase agreement for green energy in Portfolio Manager, it would adjust your greenhouse gas emission calculations.
Right.
But I'm not sure that it adjusts your actual Energy Star score, because it does use those averages to determine your source energy. So
Right.
I would have to look into the details to know if that mattered. I think one important point is, if the solar is what would be called behind the meter, meaning it's on your side of the meter and you're net metering, then you would definitely see some benefit to that on your Energy Star score.
Right.
But if it's in front of the meter, which, say, if you're purchasing it from a third party under a power purchase agreement, it's in front of the meter, I don't think you see the impact on your Energy Star score. But again, I would have to drill into the details to make a definitive comment on that.
All right. The only other last question I see is, what if a building is master meter with sub meters, though owner pays all? No, we've already went through that one. I believe we've already addressed that. But there are no further questions, Oliver.
Okay. Well, if there are further questions, I have my email address up here. You know how to reach us. You know how to reach DCSEU. I'm more than happy to answer any further questions. Again, this was a 1-hour introduction seminar to building energy benchmarking. I hope that you got answers to most of the questions and heard what you expected to hear. If there is any follow-up, please reach out to us and we'll provide additional information as we can. And I would say thank you for attending, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Yes, and thank you so much, Oliver and Baumann Consulting, and thank you, Scott, as well. I would just like to add, I'm going to put it in the chat, DOEE has a benchmarking help center as well for technical support. I'll put this link in the chat. And the DCSEU will be following up on individual questions that weren't answered directly. And thank you all.